took everything from me in the divorce. My home, my money, even my daughter. I thought I was finished, but I was only beginning. Before you hear my story, tap subscribe and drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated, discarded like you didn't matter, or told you'd never make it without them. They say time heals. They lie. Time doesn't heal, it hardens. I used to believe marriage was a fortress, that if I built it brick by brick with loyalty, patience, and sacrifice, it would stand against any storm. But when it collapsed, I realized I'd only built the walls around myself. And Daniel was the one holding the key. The day the court ruling came down, I felt like someone had pressed a cold blade against my throat and dragged it slowly, deliberately. I sat in the mahogany-paneled courtroom, the air too thick to breathe, watching the judge shuffle papers while Daniel's lawyer, a man Daniel had trained personally, smirked like he already knew the outcome. Custody of the minor child, Lily Whitman, will be awarded to the father, the judge announced, voice as neutral as if he were reading a grocery list. The division of assets, as argued, will also favor the respondent. My ears rang. I could see the judge's lips moving, but his words blurred into a buzzing void. Favor the respondent. Custody awarded to the father. Daniel didn't look at me. He just leaned back in his chair, hands folded neatly on the table, the corners of his mouth twitching into the faintest smile. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I did. I knew every angle of that face, every tilt of his brow. That micro-smile was for me. A final, private twist of the knife. I wanted to scream, to leap across the aisle, and shake the judge until he saw reason. But I couldn't. My throat locked, and my body felt like stone. When the gavel struck, it was like my heart split open. The courthouse steps blurred as I stumbled outside. I barely noticed the cold air burning my lungs, or the reporters snapping pictures of Daniel as he strolled past me like I was invisible. I clutched my coat tighter, but nothing could warm me. I had lost everything. Nights blurred together after that. I slept on my friend Hannah's couch, pretending her cheerful chatter and endless cups of tea made the silence easier. She tried, God bless her, but I could see the pity in her eyes. I hated that pity more than I hated Daniel. The first week, I stared at the ceiling until dawn, my mind replaying every detail of the trial. How Daniel's lawyer painted me as an unstable mother. How my own attorney floundered, outgunned and underprepared. How Daniel produced receipts for expenses I'd never seen. Accounts I never knew existed, making me look careless, irresponsible. He was meticulous. Of course he was. I had given up my career years ago to support his. When he came home late, I told myself the long hours were for us, for our future. When he canceled vacations, I swallowed the disappointment. I packed his briefcase every morning, ironed his shirts, smiled at charity galas, and told myself it was love. And he had taken all of that, wrapped it in a lie, and turned it against me. The worst was Lily. My daughter had been my anchor. I still woke up some mornings expecting to hear her padded footsteps racing down the hall, her small hands tugging at the blanket, her giggles bubbling as she demanded pancakes. Instead, I woke to silence. The visitation schedule Daniel allowed me was insultingly slim. 2 weekends a month, supervised at his mansion. Even then, he hovered like a shadow, pretending civility but radiating control. Once when I kissed Lily's forehead and whispered, "I love you, baby," Daniel interrupted with a pointed, "Don't make promises you can't keep." Lily looked confused, her big brown eyes flicking between us. My chest caved in. I realized then that he wasn't just taking custody. He was rewriting her memories of me. The turning point came one bitter January evening. Hannah had gone to bed early, leaving me alone on the couch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The TV flickered, muted, casting blue shadows across the room. I wasn't even watching. My gaze had snagged on a framed photo Hannah had left on the coffee table. A picture of her at graduation, beaming in her cap and gown. Something inside me cracked. I had once been that woman. Full of promise, determined, unafraid. Before Daniel, I had dreamed of becoming a lawyer. I'd even been accepted into law school, but when Daniel's career took off, I deferred, telling myself we couldn't both chase demanding paths. He had promised me we were a team, that my time would come later. Later had never arrived. I sat there for hours staring at that photo, the realization hardening in me like cooling steel. Daniel had stolen my life, my dignity, my child. But I wasn't dead yet. The next morning, I walked into the local library, my hair unbrushed, my clothes still smelling faintly of last night's tears. I pulled a stack of LSAT prep books from the shelf, my hands trembling as I carried them to a table. The librarian gave me a curious glance, but I didn't care. Page after page, I devoured the material, scribbling notes until my fingers cramped. I had to pause every hour to unclench my jaw, but the ache reminded me I was moving forward. Days turned into weeks. I studied at the library, at Hannah's kitchen table, even on the bus when I could scrape together enough for fare. I sold my wedding ring for tuition deposits, a decision that should have hurt but instead felt like freedom. Daniel thought he had buried me, but I was planting roots. It wasn't easy. God, it was brutal. There were nights I wept into my notes, certain I couldn't do it. I was too old, too broken, too late. But every time doubt clawed at me, I pictured Lily's face. And Daniel's smirk. That smirk became my fuel. The first time I saw him again outside of visitation, he was leaving a restaurant downtown, arm draped casually around a younger brunette in a silk dress. Her laugh rang out, sharp and careless, as she leaned into him. I froze in the shadow of a bookstore awning, heart hammering. Sabrina. I'd heard of her, of course. Whispers during the divorce trial, rumors in Daniel's firm. Seeing her in person was like swallowing broken glass. She was everything I wasn't, young, fresh, unburdened. I expected jealousy. Instead, I felt something colder. Pity. She had no idea who she was standing next to. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of Hannah's heater filling the silence. My mind replayed Sabrina's laugh, Daniel's hand on her waist, the way he looked at her like a man who believed he'd never be caught. For the first time since the divorce, I smiled. He thought he had won. He thought he had buried me. But I was still here. And I was learning how to fight. And one day, when he least expected it, I would burn down the empire he had built on my ashes. They say time heals. That's a lie. Time doesn't heal. It hardens. It shapes you into something sharper, something colder. By the time 5 years had passed, the woman Daniel had crushed in that courtroom no longer existed. In her place stood me, Elena Whitman, attorney at law. I still remembered the first time I saw my name etched on the frosted glass of my office door. It was small, modest compared to the skyscraper towers Daniel commanded, but it was mine. My space. My work. My survival carved into steel and ink. The road there hadn't been pretty. I'd worked like a machine, studying until my eyes burned, clerking at firms that barely paid enough to keep me afloat, swallowing every sneer from men who saw me as too late, or too desperate. They had no idea what desperation could do for a woman. Now when I walked into a courtroom, I carried myself with the calmness of a sharpened blade. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I spoke with precision, and I watched my words land like invisible punches. Clients came to me not for kindness but for results. And I gave them results. It was a rainy Tuesday when she walked into my office. I was reviewing depositions when my assistant poked her head in. "There's a potential client," she said. "She doesn't have an appointment, but well, she's insistent." I sighed, massaging the bridge of my nose. "Send her in." The door opened, and in swept a woman with sleek hair, a designer coat, and desperation clinging to her like expensive perfume. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Sabrina. She didn't recognize me. Not right away. Her eyes were frantic, scanning the room, the folders on my desk, the law books lining the shelves. She sat down before I even gestured. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I need help." I folded my hands on the desk, my face a mask of polite neutrality. Inside, a cold wave rippled through me. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" I said. She started to talk. About how her husband was trying to leave her. About how he'd hidden money, moved assets, and was threatening to take custody of their little boy. I already knew the story before she finished. Daniel. The name hung in the air like poison when she finally said it. My husband, Daniel Whitman. She didn't see it, but my fingers curled tightly against the wood of my desk. A slow burn lit in my chest, not rage, not grief, but something deeper. I see, I said smoothly. And oh, I did. As she spoke, I studied her. Sabrina had changed since the night I saw her outside that restaurant. The glow of novelty had faded. She looked worn, her eyes shadowed, her voice fraying at the edges. The sparkle of being Daniel's trophy had dulled into the ache of being Daniel's target. He was doing to her what he had done to me, and she had come to me for salvation. It was almost poetic. For the next hour, I let her pour her heart out. Every sentence was a stone I tucked carefully into the fortress I was building against Daniel. She told me about the offshore accounts he thought she didn't know about, the shell companies, the sudden withdrawals. She even slid across a manila folder filled with documents she'd copied in secret. I took them, my expression unreadable, though my pulse raced with the thrill of holding Daniel's secrets in my hands. And you want representation? I asked. She nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. I heard you're ruthless. That you win cases other lawyers won't touch. Please. I don't know who else to turn to. Her eyes were wide, pleading. I let a silence stretch between us, long enough for her desperation to deepen. Finally, I said, I'll take your case. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with Sabrina's folder spread across the table. Rain pattered softly against the window, the city glowing faintly through the mist. I opened each document slowly, savoring the weight of what I held. Bank transfers, tax evasions, a shell corporation under the name of a distant cousin. Classic Daniel. Clean on the surface, rotten underneath. I traced the numbers with my fingertips, each detail a key to unlocking the empire he had built. He had once sat across a courtroom from me, smug in the certainty that I was powerless. Now he would sit across from me again. Only this time, I wasn't the broken woman he had left behind. This time, I would be the storm. The first confrontation came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, during a preliminary hearing, I walked into the courtroom with Sabrina at my side. Daniel was already there, flanked by his team of lawyers. When his eyes landed on me, he froze. It was only a flicker, a tightening of his jaw, a narrowing of his eyes, but I saw it. Recognition. Shock. I smiled faintly, the kind of polite, professional smile that gave nothing away. Good morning, Mr. Whitman, I said as we passed. His lips thinned. During the session, I watched him struggle to mask his unease. He tried to regain his confidence, throwing barbed remarks about inexperienced representation, but his eyes kept darting to me. For the first time, Daniel Whitman wasn't in control. That night, I stood before my bathroom mirror, brushing out my hair. I stared at my reflection, my expression calm, almost serene. The woman staring back was not the Elena who had once cried on Hannah's couch, broken and lost. This woman was steady, dangerous, patient. And Daniel knew it. The weeks that followed were a chess game. I maneuvered carefully, gathering evidence, filing motions, watching Daniel grow more agitated with every step. Sabrina, oblivious to the true depth of my vendetta, clung to me like I was her lifeline. Sometimes I almost pitied her. Almost. Because though she had once been part of the reason I lost everything, I couldn't forget that she too had been played. The true enemy was Daniel, and I was finally close to bringing him down. The night before the final hearing, I sat at my desk, reviewing the case files one last time. The evidence was airtight. Daniel had no way out. I thought of Lily, now 10 years old, growing more distant every year Daniel kept her under his roof. My chest ached, but the ache only fueled me. This wasn't just for Sabrina. It wasn't just for me. It was for every year he had stolen from my daughter. Tomorrow, I would make him pay. The courthouse smelled the same as it had years ago, polished wood, old paper and faint disinfectant. But I wasn't the same woman who'd walked in here broken. I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, Sabrina fidgeting beside me, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. I, on the other hand, was steady, calm, my breathing even, my mind sharp as glass. Because today Daniel Whitman was finally going to bleed. Are you sure we're ready? Sabrina whispered, her eyes wide. I turned to her, giving a small, reassuring smile. We're ready. What I didn't say was, I've been ready for this day for years. Inside, Daniel was already seated with his legal team. He looked the picture of control, Expensive suit, neatly combed hair, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. But his eyes told another story. The moment they landed on me, the smirk faltered. He quickly masked it, leaning toward his attorney as though reviewing notes, but I saw the tightness in his shoulders, the stiffness in his jaw. He knew. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Daniel's lawyer went first, spinning the usual narrative. Devoted father, financially stable, concerned for his son's welfare. He painted Sabrina as unstable, frivolous, too emotional to handle custody. I let him speak. I let him pour out Daniel's carefully constructed lies. My face remained impassive, my notes untouched. When he finished, the judge turned to me. Ms. Whitman. I stood, smoothing the front of my blazer. My heels clicked softly against the floor as I approached the bench. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. The picture painted by opposing counsel is compelling, but it's incomplete. What we have here is not the portrait of a devoted father, but of a man who has manipulated both his wife and the legal system for years. I slid a binder onto the evidence table. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Exhibit A. I took my time, laying out each piece of evidence. Bank transfers to offshore accounts. Shell corporations hidden under relatives' names. False declarations on tax documents. Emails Daniel had sent to associates, instructing them on how to conceal assets. Each page I presented stripped away a layer of his carefully constructed facade. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his composure crack. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Daniel's face was pale, his knuckles white as he gripped his pen. I pressed on. Your Honor, my client has endured threats and manipulation. She has been painted as unstable when, in fact, she has been the victim of calculated financial abuse. Mr. Whitman has attempted to leave her destitute while hiding millions in assets. And he has done so under the guise of paternal concern. The judge's brow furrowed as he flipped through the documents. This is serious, he muttered. I allowed myself a small pause, just long enough for the tension to settle, then added, and there's more. I called a witness. An accountant Daniel had once underpaid and dismissed without thought. I had tracked him down, and with the promise of protection, he had provided testimony confirming Daniel's illegal practices. The man's voice shook as he described Daniel's schemes, the way he bragged about always staying one step ahead of the law. By the time he finished, Daniel was no longer smirking. He sat rigid, his face a mask of fury barely contained. I felt a surge of satisfaction, not warm or joyful, but cold, precise, like a blade finally finding its mark. When it was Daniel's turn to take the stand, his arrogance flared one last time. He tried to twist his words, to charm the judge as he had years ago. But charm couldn't cover panic. I watched him sweat under the cross-examination, his answers stumbling, contradictions piling up. Mr. Whitman, I said evenly, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. Are you asking this court to believe that hundreds of thousands of dollars simply disappeared? His jaw clenched. They were investments. Investments you failed to disclose. I cut in, sliding another document onto the table. Investments in companies registered to your mistress's name. Do you deny it? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's face flushed. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No further questions, I said smoothly, returning to my seat. The judge deliberated only briefly before delivering the ruling. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, the court rules in favor of the petitioner. Custody of the minor child will be awarded to Mrs. Whitman, with substantial financial compensation granted. Additionally, the court will be referring Mr. Whitman's financial records to the district attorney's office for further investigation. The gavel struck. It was done. Sabrina gasped beside me, her hands flying to her mouth. Relief flooded her features, tears welling in her eyes. I, however, felt something different. Not relief. Not joy. Satisfaction. I looked across the courtroom at Daniel. He sat frozen, his empire crumbling in real time. His reputation, his fortune, his control, slipping through his fingers like sand. For the first time in years, he looked small. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Ms. Whitman, how do you feel about today's victory? One shouted. I gave a polite, professional smile. Justice was served, I said simply, before guiding Sabrina through the crowd. But inside I was silent. Silent and steady, the storm finally spent. That evening, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city. The air was crisp, the lights below glittering like scattered embers. I thought of Lily, of the years I had lost, the nights I had cried for her, the emptiness Daniel had forced upon me. I had reclaimed my dignity, my strength, my future. Daniel had taken everything in the divorce. And now, I had taken everything he loved. Revenge doesn't come with a roar. It arrives quietly, precise, when the world least expects it. If you've ever bided your time in silence, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, stay patient. Stay unbreakable.